access control models. Just because you have the authority to change things doesn't mean you have the permission to actually exercise these authorizations. So this would be an example. You now, instead of just having a role hierarchy, you have some additional roles, like a departmental security officer, DSO, like a project security officer, PSO. Excuse me. And you have these tuples or pairs in the admin authority relation, which define. Can you see the distinction between the red and the black lines? It's not obvious from me here. I hope it comes out okay on the TV camera. So you get these additional lines in the hierarchy. So just some terminology. If you have an edge, AR, in admin authority relation, then we call A an administrative role just for convenience to give it a name. And we also say that A controls R. So we can talk about the set of roles controlled by A. It's the set of pairs A, R, taken over the whole set R. So the administrative scope now of A is determined not just by the role R. Before, when we talked about administrative scope in RHA1, this would have just been A, this would have just been A. We've now replaced this with the roles controlled by A. And the strict administrative scope is obtained by taking away those roles it controls. So what does this look like? Well, in a very simple example, you end up with, again, the natural, if you like, unit of administration for PSO1. Because PSO1 only controls PL1. So the administrative scope of PSO1 is simply the administrative scope of PL1. Now, an interesting point to note is that RHA1 is actually a special case of RHA4, because what you can do is simply define for each role in the hierarchy the pair RR. Okay. So hierarchy operations work just the same. If you want to change the admin authority relation, that's fine too, but the second part of the pair that you add to this relation has to be in the strict administrative scope. But otherwise, it all works fine. Well, I say it all works fine. There are a couple of things that need to be tidied up. If you start changing this admin authority relation, if you start changing the role hierarchy, then there are certain side effects that you need to take into consideration. I'll talk about those a bit later. So we now want to talk about user role assignment and permission role assignment. Well, this is quite straightforward. We've now got a model for role hierarchy administration. We've got this concept of administrative scope. To assign a user to a role, it's simply sufficient for this role to belong to the administrative scope of A. Now, you might want a slightly richer model for controlling assignments of users to roles. And RBAC 97 has these relations which specify some preconditions that have to be satisfied before a user can be assigned to a role. Well, this is quite straightforward in my model as well. You basically define a set of prerequisite roles which act as in the same way as this constraint C in the can-assign relation of RBAC 97. Basically, this constraint C said that a user would have to be assigned to each of the roles specified in C. There are some slight subtleties in the can-assign relation, which I don't want to go into here. There isn't really enough time. But you can certainly simulate a lot of what RBAC 97 does with this can-assign relation using this idea of prerequisite roles. So what is RBAC 97? Well, it was the first attempt at a role-based administrative model, and it has been influential. It identified all the important issues and had a pretty good stab at solving them. But as we'll see in subsequent slides, I think it did have some shortcomings. It was broken down into 3 submodels, one for user role assignment, one for permission role assignment, and one for what you might call role assignment or role hierarchy operations. So the model that I developed and RBAC 97 have some similarities. They were both designed to interoperate with RBAC 96. As I said before, this was the natural role-based model to use at the time. The intention was to somehow decentralize administration, to give certain administrative roles responsibility for certain parts of the hierarchy. This was to get away from this idea of a super user or a super role that could control the whole hierarchy. And we both attempt to use structural properties of the role hierarchy to determine whether an administrative operation should succeed. Now, the basic unit of administration in RBAC 97 is something called an encapsulated range. And encapsulated ranges, I think, it's fair to say that they're really not very easy to work with. Basically, they're a self-contained sub-hierarchy with a unique minimal element and a unique maximal element. And there aren't that many role hierarchies that have such sub-hierarchies, which really limits the applicability of RBAC 97. And I'll have some more to say about that in a minute. This, incidentally, is why you can't, so many of those operations that were fine in my model just don't work in RBAC 97 because they break encapsulated ranges, basically. But firstly, let me just talk a little bit about completeness. By that I mean, have you addressed all the components of your model? Have you made sure that you identified which are dynamic, which are static, and that you can change the ones that are dynamic? Well, RBAC 97 introduces 5 relations which are all static. It's not obvious that you want to do this. You might well want to change your administrative setup. So I claim that these probably should be dynamic, but they're not in RBAC 97. So in the RHA model, all these relations are dynamic. All the RBAC 96 relations are dynamic, as is the only relation I introduced, which is admin authority. So what about coherence? How does it all sort of fit together? Well, there are some problems with RBAC 97. As I hinted at earlier, they sort of hit the easy targets first. They looked at user role assignment and permission role assignment, and they adopted a rather arbitrary way of doing it, which was if this user satisfies some precondition, then he or she can be assigned to some role in this range. Well, that's fine on its own. But if you then fold in some hierarchy operations, what happens to those constraints in the URA 97 relations, the can assign relation, for example? Well, it's not clear. The RBAC 97 model glosses over this. So this is not ideal. So the idea of actually deciding what the natural unit of administration would be, and then building your administrative model in terms of that primitive administrative scope, in other words, is a more natural way of getting a more coherent model. Or, well, so I would claim anyway. Well, I suppose I would, wouldn't I? I developed it. Applicability. Well, I think I've already shown that very often, I mean, bearing in mind I wasn't using my own example. I was using Ravi Sandhu's example of a hierarchy. There were precious few operations you could actually do on that hierarchy using